Well, everybody, my name is Jordan. If we haven't had the chance to meet, and I get to be one of the pastors here at Faith Chapel, I want to say unique welcome to those joining all over the place. We've got people all over Montana, Colorado, Washington, Wyoming, Utah, and it looks like some people joining from Morocco and Colombia. So good to have you with us today. And I want to say welcome to our friends in Sydney and in Red Lodge and in the women's prison. It is so good to be together, even when we're not in the same room. Glad to have you all joining us. This weekend, we are going to be continuing in our series called Pack the Essentials. And I don't know about you, but I followed Jesus for a long time. I grew up in the church, and so along the way, and I think this happens no matter what your belief system is, whatever your worldview is as you go, there begin to be things that get attached on, that become more and more important. That can be perspectives or worldviews or things that just begin to crowd out the actual essentials of our faith. And so what we're doing is we're looking at what does it look like to follow Jesus? What are the real essentials? What are the things we need to hold on to? And we're examining the old Roman Creed, which was the early church. This is their attempt, their efforts to try and unite the early church around the essentials, around the things that they wanted to say, hey, this is what we believe, and these are the essential things to unite us together as the church. And so we're going to read through the first couple lines of this old Roman Creed. If you read it aloud and together with me. I believe in God the Father Almighty and in Christ Jesus, his only Son, our Lord. So it's just the first couple of lines from the old Roman Creed. And so what we're looking at today is Jesus, our Lord. Last week, Nate ended his message with a statement that I absolutely loved because it set us up perfectly for what we're talking about today. And he said, if Jesus is Lord, it means he's worthy of our worship. If Jesus is Lord, it means he's worthy of my worship. Now, when I say the word worship, there could be a few different things that pop into your mind. Maybe one of the things that pops into your mind is kind of how people have worshiped throughout history and through different cultures and in time. And you might think of older, ancient cultures that their act of worship was trying to appease the gods, right? They were saying, hey, we want our crops to grow. We want the rain to fall. We want health and wealth and vitality. We want to be okay. And so they would try and worship the gods in all these crazy ways just to make them happy. And we've seen that throughout history. Or maybe when I say the word worship, you think of a particular song. Maybe a song just is right at the front of your mind. Or maybe your favorite worship band or a genre style of music that we would call worship. But no matter what you picture, no matter what comes to the forefront, we need to examine and respond to a couple of things. The first would be is if we're going to align with that creed, if we're going to say those first two lines and we're going to say that's true, that if there's a God, it should change everything. If there's a God, it should change everything. The same way we would look at ancient cultures and watch how they would orient their lives in such a way that they were trying to appease the God and not offend the God because they wanted to be okay. They wanted rain, they wanted crops, they wanted health, they wanted their tribe to be fine. We today would say, if there is a God, it should change our lives. If that's true, it should change our lives. And then second, if Jesus is Lord, how do we worship him? If Jesus truly is Lord, if he is King, how do we worship him? What does that look like? And so if you are what we would call spiritually unresolved, maybe you came through the doors today and you are uncertain. You would say, I'm not sure about this Jesus man that you talk about. I'm not convinced about what you all believe. Or maybe you're joining online and just trying to check things out and you're not sure. You don't know where you land with. Here's what I would want to say is, that's okay. We are glad you're here. I am glad you're here. And we hope that this is a safe space to explore who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. But as we go through service today, you get a free pass. You don't have to participate. You don't have to do anything that we're doing. We're going to look at Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, because what we have in these two verses is Paul, in a letter to the early Roman church, is he's going to outline what it looks like for us to respond to God and worship. So let's read this together. It says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. So Paul, throughout the letter to the Romans, in the first parts of the letter, he's taken chapter after chapter, and he has outlined, we are all of us, the entirety of humanity, we have missed it. We've completely missed it, no matter whether you believe or you don't, we've all missed it. But God's grace through the person of Jesus is enough for all of us. It's enough for all of us, no matter who you are or where you come from. Paul is trying to make this great argument that we all need God's grace, and through Jesus, we have it. And then he's saying, in view of God's mercy, this is the mercy he's talking about. God's mercy is his grace, his love through Jesus. So because of that, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So he's referencing a couple of things here. He's referencing this old sacrificial system that his readers would have understood, both in their culture, but also the Israelite people used to offer animal sacrifices as a way to make themselves right with God. And so Paul is using that as imagery to say, you are to offer yourselves not as a dead sacrifice, but as a living sacrifice. It's an offering, it's a giving up. But he's also saying he's inviting us to offer our bodies. And what he means by saying bodies is every part of you, all of you, the entirety. You are to be a living sacrifice. And he says, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the way I would summarize this is what Paul is trying to say is worship is how you live your life. Worship is how you live your life. So what does that look like for us today in the year 2024? Before we answer that, I actually want to go backwards in time, and I want to tell you a brief account of 3 young Jewish men from an account in the Old Testament. These 3 young men were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they had been conquered by an outside nation. And they were brought into this nation, and they were in exile. And their new king that had set himself up said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna build a massive statue. I think I'm great. I think I'm awesome. And so I'm gonna build the statue of myself, and we're gonna have a huge party. We're gonna do this massive celebration. It's gonna be a festival. Everybody's invited. And then we're gonna play some music. And when we play that music, everyone is gonna bow down and worship this statue of me. And if they don't, we're gonna throw them in a huge furnace so that they die. And somehow everybody's like, yeah, great idea, let's do that, let's roll with it. And so this happens. So the king sets up this huge festival, the statue gets built, and they gather and everybody comes and they play the song, and everyone bows down except for these 3 young Jewish men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it turns out they do get thrown into the furnace. They get thrown into the fire. And we don't have that today, right? We don't have in our culture evidence or symbols the same way they did. We don't have things that we bow down to, physical statues and idols and kings commanding us to kneel or else. But I do think we have some things that would point to what we worship. And it might look a little bit like this. Time. Where do you spend your time? What fills your calendar? What fills your days, your weeks, your months? Your attention? What do you think about all the time? What do you obsess over? What do you come back to again and again and again? Or your energy? how do you spend your energy? And under that, I think we could put our resources, because we take our energy to go earn resources that then we go take to spend again. And so under energy, where is your energy focused? Where are you investing yourself? And from those three things, your time, your attention, and your energy, we find what we value. What we value. There's an old definition that I looked up. I used to be a worship leader for the high school ministry, and I was trying to teach the high school students what worship meant, and I looked up this definition, and I promise you I'm not lying. This is real. I cannot find it ever again, but I tried to look up the definition of the word worship, and the definition I found was to ascribe worth to. To ascribe worth to. And I can't find it again. I don't know where I found it, but I promise I'm not making it up. But worship is to ascribe worth to something. And which kind of means what you value. And so through our time, our attention, and our energy, Paul is inviting us to offer that. That's what we are to use as our worship. But Paul also is saying offer your bodies. And so we're gonna answer the question, what role do our bodies play in worship? What role do our bodies play? And we have language around different postures that we have. And some of them might be around pride or confidence. And so, let's say you've got somebody and they're kind of feeling down on themselves, or they're not feeling very confident. We would say to them, hey, chin up, buddy. Hey, chin up. You can do this. Keep your chin up. And what are we trying to communicate? Well, when you have your chin up, you look proud. You look confident. Or maybe we've interacted with somebody and we just thought they were all puffed up with pride. Somebody who just walks around like they are the coolest guy in town. They're just puffed up with pride. We've got language to communicate that. Or maybe we've got a posture of arms crossed. And what does this communicate typically? Especially if their face is sour, right? It communicates stubbornness, immovable. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have postures that would communicate humility, what I'm calling humble postures. And it might be raising our hands. It might be kneeling or bowing. And in a church context, depending on your background, those type of postures might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. You might think of something that just you're uneasy about it. But I hope that today, as we explore some of these different postures, that we can find freedom in participating and being a part of these. And the first role that our bodies play would be in kneeling. In the book of Revelation, the Apostle John writes a book called Revelation, and in it he has multiple times throughout this book where he says that there are elders that surround the throne of God, and they kneel, they bow down before God, and they take off their crowns and they lay them before God. And so we have this picture of kneeling before God as a way to worship with our bodies. The second would be raising our hands. That through raising our hands, it's the opposite of crossing my arms or being stubborn or immovable. In fact, this posture would be, it's vulnerable, right? Everything, I can't block anything. I can't fight back when I'm like this. And it's the universal sign of what? Surrender. I give up. I give in. It's deference. It's saying, I'm giving in to you. And these bodily postures can be an outward expression of an inward posture, an inward thing that's going on inside. The next role that our bodies can play is physiological response. A physiological response. And so there's been a handful of books I've read and some different conversations I've listened to, but what I love is over the last several years, it might have even been longer, but different sociologists and psychologists and scientists have studied what happens when we as human beings sing together, when we chant together, when we dance together, or when we move in rhythm together. And what they found is that when we do one of these things, or all of these things, we begin to unite. Our brains begin firing together, and we start to build a sense of community just by doing one of those things together. And it's one of the reasons, actually, why we repeat songs here. In fact, some of you might have come in today or have come in the past, and we sing a song and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're singing that song again. Didn't we sing it last week? And the answer is yeah, we probably did sing it last week. But one of the reasons we do that is because we want to learn the songs together so that we can sing together, because it unites us and brings us together and gives us a sense of community. About a year ago, I got to go on what I call the trip of a lifetime. My family and I got to go visit one of my lifelong friends in Australia. And we were there for a couple of weeks, and one of the things that we got to do was go to an Australian rules football game. They call it footy. And if you've never seen Australian rules football, it is wild. I absolutely encourage it. It is so fun. So we got to go to this footy match, and my buddy's team is called the Essendon Bombers. And he goes, hey, listen, before we go to this game, you have to learn their song. You have to learn it because the tradition is, for decades, what they've done is at the end of the match, whoever wins the game, the stadium, the fans get to sing their winning team's song. It's tradition. It's what we do. You've got to learn this song. I'm like, all right, cool. So he gets his phone, and I mean, all weekend, we're listening to this song over and over and over again. And we'd try, and he'd go, nope, try again. You didn't get this part. I mean, like, he's coaching us and sing it and over. And I'm trying to learn the melody and the words. And I'm going to be honest, I don't really like this song. It wasn't that good. But we got to the match, and it's a great game. And then the Bombers won. The game ends. I look at him with a big grin. He looks at me. My son Harvey's there with me. And the whole stadium erupts with, see the Bombers fly up, up to win the premiership flag. And I was like, wow, I get it. This is amazing. The whole stadium was united singing this song. And I was like, I've been a fan for 6 hours, but I'm in. I'm committed. I even bought a hat, so I'm like a real fan now. But this is one of the reasons that we do this, because this connects us. Singing together, chanting together, dancing together, moving in rhythm together helps connect us and give us a sense of community. The next role that our bodies play in worship is sometimes our bodies lead our emotions. Sometimes our bodies lead our emotions. And the classic example that I use is sometimes I'll come to the kitchen at the end of a long day, and I'll find a stack of dishes in the sink. And the boys will be in bed. My wife, Alyssa, is getting ready for bed. And I look at that stack of dishes, and I think to myself, I really don't want to do those dishes. And if you know me, I hate the dishes. It's my least favorite chore. You could talk to my parents. My mom actually just told me she doesn't remember this, but my dad does. My siblings do as well. If you ask them, 8th grade Jordan would cry for sometimes upwards of an hour fighting to not do the dishes. I hate doing the dishes. It's the worst chore that exists. And so I look at that pile of dishes in the sink, and I just think, it's the last thing I want to do right now. But most of the time, when I decide, you know what, this is how I can love and serve my wife, I'm going to do them anyways. Most of the time, about halfway through doing those dishes, I feel like serving my wife. I'm glad that I'm doing this. And sometimes we need to physically engage our bodies first, because the act is what gets our emotions in line. And this is so important, because when it comes to worship, what happens when I don't feel like worshiping God? What happens when we don't feel God? What happens when we come into a room or an experience like this or many others and we just don't feel it? It's not there. And one of the dangers that can happen is when our worship becomes tied to our emotions and our experiences, is if it's about how I feel, if it's about me, I've accidentally swapped the object of my worship, right? I've made it about me. And I'm trying to get something out of it when worship is supposed to be about a God who is other and who is holy and who is worthy of my praise. And so the question is, can we worship even when I don't feel like it, even when we don't feel like it. We're going to look at some different ways to worship, and as we do this, I'm going to invite you to participate, and it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, so thanks for indulging me, but the first one we're going to do is kneeling before a king. Kneeling before a king. And there's many examples of this throughout history and throughout stories of when you would come before royalty or come before a king, it was custom and it was appropriate that you would have to lower yourself. You'd have to get down low. And you weren't allowed to raise your head above the head of the royalty or the person you were honoring. And in fact, sometimes there would be repercussions. There could be punishments if you did raise your head above the king, because it would be a sign of disrespect and dishonor. And so as you entered the king's presence, you would have to lower yourself and crawl to have audience with the king, to show deference and honor. And then as you had your audience with the king, when it was over, you would then have to crawl backwards, humbly, because you can't show your back. You can't show your backside to a king. And so what I'd like to do is, if today you would confess Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King, I would like to practice kneeling before our King together. Before we do that, I want to address a couple of groups of people and say that you have an out. You don't have to do this. If you are uncertain what you believe about Jesus, and you would not say that Jesus is Lord, you don't have to do this. This is not for you right now. If you are physically unable to kneel, that's okay. You don't have to do this. You can have a heart posture that still would communicate kneeling. And then for those of you who are joining online, maybe you're joining from a coffee shop and it's just not the right time or place. And so if that's you, maybe practice this another time. But for the rest of us, if you would call Jesus Lord, would you join me? Would you stand and turn around and face the seat behind you and kneel? And could we take 30 seconds? And as we do this, here's what you're going to experience. Your knees are going to hurt. Your ankles are going to hurt. Your toes might hurt. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel self-conscious. But could this be a moment where together, in your own words, you would say, Jesus, I kneel before you. You are my King. Let's take 30 seconds together. As we all stand and take our seats again. Throughout history, there's been many examples. There's probably countless examples of another way of worship, which I'm collectively grouping as songs, poetry, or artistic praise. And we've got examples of this through, and we will sing later, I promise. But we've got so many examples of beautiful renditions of things, whether that's stained glass windows or paintings or cathedrals. But all throughout history, one of the ways that we respond to God and we worship is through artistic expressions of beauty. And it's a beautiful way that we get to respond and praise our Creator. The next one is silence and stillness. In Psalm 46:10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I come to God in prayer, when I come to him in moments, it can tend to be one-sided. I tend to talk too much. I tell him all my needs, all my worries, all my thoughts, all my concerns, all the things he can do differently and should be doing differently. And then I say amen and I end the moment. And it can be, I'm just talking about me. I can forget who I'm talking to, the creator of the universe, a majestic God. And I miss moments to sit in awe and reverence before my Creator. And so in response to this psalm, one of the ways that we can worship is sitting before him and just saying, you are God. I'm going to be still before you because you will be exalted, which means worshiped. You will be lifted high. And so what I want to do is I just want to spend 20 seconds sitting before God in silence and stillness. And here's what I think you'll experience. I think your brain, even in the short time, 20 to 30 seconds, you'll think about, did I forget to lock the door? Is my car running? Did I feed the dog today? Like you're going to have just so many thoughts come into your mind. And I would just invite you in this, just for these 20 to 30 seconds, just gently say, no, I'm going to be still and know that he is God. Let's try that together. The final way that we'll try today is what I'm calling writing prayers. And when I tend to pray out loud, my brain tends to just bounce all over the place. I can be like a dog and squirrel. I'm just like something distracts me and I'm gone. But what I've found is that throughout my life, when I take times to journal, I get pen and paper and I write my prayers to God. It focuses my gratitude. It focuses my thoughts. It reminds me what I'm supposed to be thinking about and talking to God about. But one of the things that we also see throughout history is we've got collections of prayers of people who have gone before us and written down their prayers for us as acts of worship. And in fact, we've got books in the Bible like Psalms and Lamentations, which are these written prayers and songs to God that were written down. And so we can follow in their footsteps and do something similar. And we're not going to take a long time to do this, and so I'm going to give you a simple version of a prayer that you can write down and you can carry with you, and it's called a breath prayer. And the idea of a breath prayer is it's something you can pray in the span of one breath, inhale and exhale. And the idea is you would just re-anchor yourself throughout the day through these breath prayers. And so if you're taking notes or if you want to take notes, well, you can write one of these down. I'm going to have a handful of them as examples. Maybe write one down that resonates with you and take that with you and practice it throughout the week. Or maybe you need to jot it down on your phone, and that's okay too. But these breath prayers might look like this. Lord, restore me. Or maybe, Jesus, guide me. God, show me your love. Or show me your favor. Or maybe it's, you are good. I trust you. So with one of those prayers, could we just take a few breaths together and just practice these breath prayers for the next 20 seconds or so? Final thing we're going to explore is songs. We spend a good chunk of our services every week singing songs. So they play a really important role of what we do. But for some of you, singing or artistry or praise, these type of things, it just doesn't register with you. It doesn't do much for you. And so what's the invitation? I'm going to try and answer the question, why should I sing? Why should you sing? And some might ask, is this something to participate in, or is it something to listen to? And my answer would be, I think it's a little bit of both. That sometimes in our observation of beauty, we can view something, we can look at something and go, man, that is so great. God, I can't believe that person was able to make that. What a reflection of God's goodness. But I also think that there's opportunities for us to participate in what's happening and be a part of it. And so I would ask you, can you try something new and different today. And I love this. How cool is it that God built us so that when we do sing together, it unites us, that we are wired to do this together, to join together, that this wouldn't be just a spectator sport, something to just watch, but there's an opportunity for us to engage. And so I want to look at what role do songs play in our worship? What role do songs play? And I want to illustrate this with something. What number in the alphabet is the letter J? And how many of you started singing the alphabet song to find the number J, right? I did it too. It's number 10, just so you know if you didn't get there. But that's one of the first memorization tools that we are given. And so songs can help us memorize. One of the roles songs play in our worship is memorization. And it helps us memorize truths about who God is. There have been many seasons in my life where it was a song that brought me back through rich theological truth, that it was the song that reminded me of God's goodness, of God's posture toward me, of who he is and what he's capable of. It was a song that I had memorized and helped me in those moments. The next one would be, the next role that songs play is aspirational. It's who I wish I was. And if you've sang in church for any length of time, you maybe have sang a song that would have lyrics something like this: I surrender all, maybe something along those lines. And as you sang those words, you might have thought, but I don't surrender all. I know I'm not. And then you've got this internal conflict of, am I singing a lie in church? Is that okay? And I'm going to tell you something. It is okay. And here's why. Because through songs that are aspirational like that, what it helps us do is it helps us look to who we wish we were. There's this account in the New Testament where a man comes to Jesus and he says to him, I believe, but would you help my unbelief? And that's what these songs are for us. I surrender all, God, but I know that inside I'm not surrendering all, but I want to surrender all. I truly do. So would you help me, God, become a person that surrenders all? And sometimes it's true things in what feel like untrue situations. Sometimes the lyrics of the songs might be something like, you work all things for my good, and you might sing that or see that and you would say, no way. I'm going through too much pain, too much turmoil, too much chaos to believe that God can work all things for my good. That doesn't feel true. But it reminds us, we know that in the end, God will work all things for our good. And so we can trust that even in it, what feels like an untrue situation, we can sing those truths, even in that tension. And then the final role that songs play for us is that it can help us say the things that we want to say to God, saying things that we want to say. There's so many, I'm going to invite the band to come back out. There are so many people who are better at communicating than I am. So many lyricists, so many artists, so many poets, and they're able to craft words and phrases and things that are so beautiful and beyond. And sometimes they're able to do something like, I didn't even know I was trying to say that, but thank you for writing that and communicating that, because now I can adopt that and make that my own. I can take the words that you were so masterfully able to craft and say what I wanted to say to God all along. And so songs help us do that. We're going to explore several different types of songs today. And the first one that we're going to do is a praise song or a vertical song or a declaration of truth. And the idea behind these songs is that we would say who God is. We would praise him for his characteristics, and we would even follow in the footsteps of the elders in the book of Revelation, those 24 elders who bow down before the throne of God and they say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And so through these songs of praise, these declarations, we can join in with what's already happening and say, God, you are good. So would you stand with me as we practice singing songs of praise? The next type of song, which is called a lament. And a lament is what I call a deep sigh. You don't necessarily do them a lot in environments like this, but there are laments all throughout the scriptures. And what they are is wrestling with the questions and the doubts and the troubles and the hardships of life and bringing those before God. And sometimes they are raw, sometimes they are honest, and saying, God, where are you? Or God, how long? And those questions are held in tension with, but I know that you're good. I know that you're true, and you'll do what you will say you will do. And we're gonna practice a lament, and this is a song that I wrote several years ago, and I remember why I wrote it. There was a story I had heard about several young men who had come across a disabled man, and they'd beaten him to death. And I remember reading and hearing this story, and it just crushed me for some reason. For some reason, it just hit me. And I remember asking God, where were you? How could this happen? How could you let this happen? This is not okay. And so I remember my house was dark. I was feeling just this sense of the absence of God's presence in that moment. And I wanted to wrestle with this tension. God, where are you? How can this happen? With also just trusting and knowing you are still good. And having words like, when it's so dark like this, when dark things like this happen, it can be hard to see you at work, God. And when things feel chaotic and tumultuous, it can be hard to hear your voice. And so we're going to practice in this song of lament together. The next type of song we're going to practice is called a hymn. And hymns are songs that have been sung in the church for decades, sometimes even centuries. And I love that fact about them, that they transcend time and that we get to join in with churches that have gone before us and sing these deep, rich theological truths about who God is. And the hymn that we're going to sing today is a hymn called Come Thou Fountain. It's one of my personal favorite hymns. And in the song, there's a couple of words that we don't use very often anymore. And the first one is a word, Ebenezer. And what it means is altar or offering or sacrifice. And so the line is, here I raise my Ebenezer. And the idea is, God, here is my altar. Here's my offering. Here's my sacrifice of praise to you. And then the second word is fetter. And it's this idea, it's a shackle. It's what would bind someone together. And so the idea is, the line is, let your goodness, let your grace, like a fetter, bind me close to you. Would you draw me near, God? Would that be what holds us together? Your goodness, just the same way that shackles would. So would you stand as we sing this hymn, Come Thou Fountain? The last type of song that we're going to explore is what I'm calling songs of surrender or songs of prayer. And the idea of a song like this would be that we're putting music, we're putting lyrics to these prayers that we would want to pray to offer ourselves to God. That we were offering parts of ourselves, our whole selves, and saying, God, I give this to you. And the song that we're going to sing, Christ Be Magnified, is one of those songs. At the beginning of the message, we talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and how they decided not to conform to the pattern of their day, and they chose to stand in worship. And because of that, because they didn't worship the idol, they were thrown into the furnace. And what the account of this story goes is that the king looks in after he's thrown these three young men into the furnace, and he sees that there's a fourth person standing with them. And that fourth person was the presence of God. That God showed up in the midst of their counter-cultural worship, that they didn't bow to something else, and God was in their midst, even in the fire. And in this song, Christ Be Magnified, there's a line in it that says, and if it puts me in the fire, I'll rejoice because you're there too. And it's this idea that God, even if I choose, with my life to live in a way that's so different from the culture that there are consequences, that I end up either metaphorically or literally in the fire. God, I'm going to choose to give you all of me. I'm going to do it anyways, because when I do, I will find you there. I will worship you in the midst of this. And so could we join together and could we practice singing Christ be magnified in my life? If Jesus is Lord, if we would stand by that old Roman creed and we would say that Jesus is Lord, this is the invitation. Maybe after singing through all those songs, you're somebody who says, you know what, Jordan, you tried your best, but songs still just don't do it for me. That may be true of you, but here's the invitation nonetheless for all of us, no matter where you find yourself. If Jesus is Lord, live your life like a song. Live your life like an offering of praise and worship to God. I want to end by reading Romans 12, 1 and 2 again as a sort of benediction over you. And this is going to be from the Message version of it. It's such a perfect way, I think, to end this. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Go, be the hands, the feet, and the mouthpiece of Jesus. If you need prayer for anything, there's a team up front who would love to pray with you. You are loved. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.